Robert had always been proud of what he built. 30 diners across the state, each one carrying his family name above the door. It started with just one little restaurant 20 years ago, right after his mother passed away. She'd worked as a waitress her whole life, and he remembered watching her come home with aching feet and a tired smile, counting her tips at the kitchen table. He'd promised himself back then that if he ever made it, he'd create something better for people like her. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. The business grew, and Robert found himself spending more time in boardrooms than in actual restaurants. He reviewed spreadsheets instead of menus, talked to investors instead of customers. The diners became numbers on a page, quarterly reports, profit margins. He told himself he was building something great, that his success honored his mother's memory. But deep down, a small voice whispered that he'd lost touch with what mattered. That voice got louder 3 weeks ago when his assistant handed him the latest customer satisfaction surveys. His flagship location, the very first diner he'd opened downtown, had dropped from a solid 4.8 stars to barely 3 stars in just 6 months. The reviews weren't just bad, they were heartbreaking. Long wait times, cold food, staff that seemed exhausted and uninterested. One review simply said, "This place used to feel like home. Now it just feels empty." Robert tried to shake it off at first. Every business had ups and downs, right? Maybe it was just a rough patch. His general manager at that location sent him reassuring emails every week, promising everything was under control. The numbers would bounce back soon. Just a few staffing hiccups, nothing to worry about. But Robert couldn't stop thinking about that review. Empty. That's what someone had called his mother's legacy. So he made a decision that his board of directors would have called crazy. He was going to see for himself what was really happening, but not as the CEO. Not with advance warning and everyone on their best behavior. He wanted the truth. The kind of truth you only see when nobody knows you're watching. On a Tuesday morning, Robert looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Instead of his usual pressed suit and silk tie, he wore old jeans with a small tear at the knee and a faded blue t-shirt. He'd stopped shaving 4 days ago, and the stubble on his face made him look older, rougher around the edges. A plain baseball cap covered most of his hair. He looked like any other working guy grabbing a meal on his lunch break. Perfect. The rain started just as he pulled into the parking lot. It was that cold, miserable kind of rain that soaks through your jacket and makes everything feel gray. Robert sat in his truck for a moment, watching people hurry in and out of the diner. The sign above the door needed cleaning. He made a mental note of that. The windows looked streaky too. Small things, but they mattered. His mother used to say that details told customers whether you cared or not. Inside, the lunch rush was in full swing. The smell of coffee and grilled onions hit him immediately, mixing with the sound of clinking dishes and conversation. For a second, Robert felt a wave of nostalgia. This was what he remembered, what he'd loved about the restaurant business. But as his eyes adjusted, he started noticing the cracks in the picture. The hostess stand was empty. No one greeted him or told him to seat himself. He stood there for almost 2 minutes before he just picked a booth in the corner and sat down. From this spot, he could see most of the dining room and straight into the kitchen through the service window. The tables around him had dishes from previous customers still sitting there. A coffee cup here, a plate with half-eaten fries there. Nobody was clearing them. The servers looked run off their feet. There were only 3 of them working for a dining room that should have had at least 5 during lunch. They moved between tables with that specific kind of exhaustion that comes from doing the work of 2 people for hours on end. Robert watched one young server practically sprint from the kitchen to a table of businessmen who were clearly annoyed about their wait time. Then he saw her. A woman who looked to be in her mid-20s with light brown hair, pulled back in a ponytail that had gone messy hours ago. She approached his table with a notepad and a smile that was clearly taking effort to maintain. There were dark circles under her eyes, the kind that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her name tag said Lily. "Sorry about the wait," she said, her voice friendly despite the obvious fatigue. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Just coffee and a burger, please," Robert replied, keeping his voice casual. "However it comes is fine. You got it." "Won't be long." She scribbled on her notepad, and Robert noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "Not a lot, but enough to see." She caught him noticing and quickly steadied them, offering another smile before heading toward the kitchen. Robert settled in to watch. This was what he'd come for, to see how things really operated when the CEO wasn't breathing down everyone's neck, and what he saw troubled him more with each passing minute. The kitchen was clearly understaffed too. Through the service window he could see only 2 cooks working a grill and fryer that should have had 4 people. Orders were backing up on the ticket rail. One cook kept shaking his head and throwing his hands up in frustration. The other just looked defeated, mechanically flipping burgers with dead eyes. In the dining room, customers were getting restless. A couple at a nearby table had been waiting for their check for 10 minutes. A family with 2 small kids had been seated but hadn't seen a server yet, and the children were starting to get cranky. An elderly man at the counter was trying to flag someone down for a coffee refill. Everyone was doing their best, but there simply weren't enough hands. Lily brought Robert his coffee after about 5 minutes. Her smile was still in place, but he could see the strain behind it. She apologized again for the wait, said his burger would be up soon, and rushed off to help the family with the crying kids. Robert watched her go, remembering his mother coming home from shifts like this. The exhaustion that ran deeper than just physical tiredness. The emotional weight of wanting to do a good job but not having the support to make it happen. The burger arrived about 20 minutes later. It was decent, nothing special, but not terrible either. Robert ate slowly, observing everything. The drinks that took too long to refill. The cold fries he heard a customer complain about at another table. The apologetic expressions on the servers' faces as they dealt with one frustrated customer after another. This wasn't a problem with the food or the service, really. This was a management problem. A leadership problem, and then he heard it. At first, Robert thought he'd imagined it. The dining room was noisy with conversation and the clatter of dishes. But there it was again, coming from the kitchen. A sound that made his chest tighten. Someone was crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet, muffled sobs that someone was desperately trying to hide. The kind of crying that comes when you're at the end of your rope, but you still have to keep working because you can't afford not to. Robert set down his burger and looked toward the kitchen doors. Through the small window, he saw Lily push through into the back, her shoulders hunched forward. The crying got just a bit louder for a second before the door swung shut again. The other servers didn't even seem to notice, too busy with their own overwhelming task lists to register what was happening in the kitchen. Robert's appetite disappeared completely. He'd come here to figure out why customer scores were dropping, to see what operational issues needed fixing. But this was something else entirely. This was a human being in pain, breaking down in the middle of her shift, and apparently nobody cared enough to stop and check if she was okay. He thought about his mother again. How many times had she cried in restaurant bathrooms or walk-in freezers, trying to hold it together through her shift? How many times had she pushed through pain and worry because she had bills to pay and a son to feed? Robert had promised himself he'd build something different, something better. But sitting here now, watching one of his employees sob in his kitchen while customers complained about wait times, he realized he'd broken that promise somewhere along the way. Robert sat there frozen, his half-eaten burger forgotten on the plate in front of him. The sound of that crying had cut through all the noise and chaos of the busy diner and hit him right in the chest. He couldn't just sit there and pretend he hadn't heard it. But what could he do? If he revealed who he was right now, everyone would panic. The truth would get buried under apologies and excuses. No, he needed to understand what was really happening here first. He picked up his coffee cup and took a sip, trying to look casual while his mind raced. The lunch rush was starting to die down a bit now. A few tables had cleared out, though dirty dishes still sat waiting to be bussed. The 2 remaining servers were running around trying to catch up, but Lily hadn't come back out from the kitchen yet. That worried him more than he wanted to admit. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Robert kept glancing at the kitchen doors, waiting. Finally, Lily emerged, and his heart sank at the sight of her. She'd clearly splashed water on her face, but her eyes were still red and puffy. She'd tried to fix her hair and paste on that professional smile again, but anyone really looking could see she'd been crying. The thing that bothered Robert most was that nobody seemed to be looking. The other servers just kept working. The cook at the window just kept calling out orders. It was like this was normal, like people breaking down was just part of another Tuesday. Lily went straight to the family with the 2 kids, the ones who'd been waiting forever. Robert watched as she apologized, took their order with shaking hands, and promised to get their food out quickly. The parents were visibly annoyed but seemed to soften a bit at her obvious distress. One of the little girls, maybe 4 years old, looked up at Lily with big, curious eyes and asked if she was sad. Lily crouched down to the child's level, and even from across the room, Robert could see her fighting back fresh tears. She told the little girl she was okay, just having a tough day, and did she want extra whipped cream on her hot chocolate? The girl nodded enthusiastically, and Lily managed a genuine smile for just a moment before standing up and hurrying back toward the kitchen. Robert made a decision. He flagged down one of the other servers, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and comfortable shoes that had seen better days. Her name tag read Patricia. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his tone friendly and concerned. "Is everything okay with your coworker?" "The younger woman with the ponytail? I heard someone crying earlier and she looks pretty upset." Patricia glanced toward the kitchen and sighed, a deep sound that carried years of watching coworkers struggle. "Lily's going through a real hard time right now," she said quietly, checking to make sure no one was listening. "But she's tough. She'll get through her shift." "What kind of hard time?" Robert pressed gently. "Sorry, I don't mean to pry. My sister went through something difficult last year, and I know how much it helped when people cared enough to ask." Something in his voice, or maybe in the made-up story about his sister, made Patricia's expression soften. She looked around again, then leaned in slightly. "Her little boy is really sick. Like hospital sick. She's been picking up every shift she can to help pay for it, but it's never enough, you know? Medical bills are no joke. And our manager," she stopped herself, shaking her head. "I shouldn't say anything, but he's not exactly what you'd call understanding." Before Robert could respond, Patricia straightened up quickly. "I gotta get back to work. But thanks for asking about her. Not many people do." She hurried off to check on another table, leaving Robert sitting there with a growing knot of anger in his stomach. A sick child, medical bills, and a manager who wasn't understanding. Robert felt like he'd been punched. This was exactly the kind of situation his employee assistance program was supposed to help with. He'd personally set up that program 5 years ago, after one of his cooks had lost his home because of unexpected medical expenses. Every location was supposed to have information about it, resources for employees facing hardship. So why was Lily working herself to exhaustion instead of getting help? He looked around the diner with new eyes. Really looked. The place was hanging together, but barely. It wasn't just understaffed. There was something else, something in the atmosphere. The servers moved with a kind of defeated energy, like they were just trying to survive their shifts rather than actually enjoying their work. He thought back to the early days when his first location buzzed with a different kind of energy. People had laughed while they worked. They'd helped each other. They'd cared. When did that change? And more importantly, why hadn't he noticed? Lily came back out carrying the family's order. She served them with practiced efficiency, making sure the little girl got her promised extra whipped cream. The child's face lit up with delight, and for a second Lily's smile looked real again. But as soon as she turned away from the table, the exhaustion and worry crashed back over her features like a wave. Robert watched as she moved to the elderly man at the counter, finally getting him his coffee refill with an apology. Then she stopped by the businessmen who'd been annoyed earlier, checking if they needed anything else. She was good at her job, really good. Even running on empty. Even with whatever was tearing her apart inside, she was kind to customers and attentive to details. This was exactly the kind of employee any business should be grateful to have. The lunch rush ended, and the diner settled into that quiet lull of mid-afternoon. Only a handful of customers remained, including Robert. He'd been nursing the same cup of coffee for almost an hour now, and he knew he should probably leave soon or it would look strange. But he couldn't shake the feeling that if he left now, he'd be walking away from something important. Lily was wiping down tables, moving methodically through her section. She looked absolutely drained, like a phone on 1% battery just trying to make it to the charger. Robert checked his watch. Her shift had to be almost over, right? But then he overheard her talking to Patricia near the kitchen. "Can you let Dave know I'm taking the dinner shift too?" Lily was saying, her voice hoarse. "I know it's last minute, but I really need the hours." "Honey, you've been here since 6 this morning?" Patricia said, concern clear in her voice. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'm fine," Lily insisted, though she was obviously anything but fine. "I can handle it. I have to handle it." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue but just nodded sadly instead. All right, I'll tell him. But please try to eat something before dinner rush, okay? Robert felt his jaw clench. This woman had been working for 7 hours already and was about to work another 5 or 6, while dealing with a sick child and mounting medical bills. And where was the manager in all this? Why wasn't anyone stepping in to make sure she didn't literally work herself into the ground? As if summoned by the thought, a man emerged from the back office. He was in his late 30s, wearing a polo shirt with the diner's logo and an expression of casual superiority. He barely glanced at the dining room before heading to the kitchen, shouting something about ticket times that Robert couldn't quite make out. That had to be the manager. Robert watched as the man stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, criticizing something about how the cooks were plating the food. There was no warmth in his posture, no sense that he cared about anything except enforcing rules. Robert had seen managers like this before, had even hired a few before he learned better. The kind who thought leadership meant commanding instead of supporting. The kind who saw employees as resources to be used up rather than people to be valued. The manager turned and caught sight of Lily restocking napkin holders at the counter. "Lily," he called out loud enough that everyone in the diner could hear. "When you're done with that, I need you in the office. We need to talk." The tone wasn't friendly. It was the voice of someone about to deliver bad news, maybe even a warning or a threat. Lily's shoulders tensed immediately. She nodded without looking at him and finished what she was doing with hands that shook even more than before. Robert had seen enough. Actually, he'd seen way more than enough. But he still couldn't reveal himself, not yet. He needed to know what that manager was going to say to Lily. He needed to understand just how bad things had gotten in his absence. So he did something impulsive. He stood up, walked to the counter and asked Patricia if he could use the restroom. She pointed him toward the back near where the office was located. The hallway was dim and smelled like industrial cleaner. Robert walked slowly, listening. The office door was partially open, and he could hear the manager's voice drifting out. He positioned himself near the restroom door, out of sight but close enough to hear. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you," the manager was saying, his voice dripping with annoyance. "I'm getting complaints about your performance. Customers are saying you seem distracted, that you're slow getting their orders out." "I'm sorry, Dave." Lily's voice came, small and tired. "I'm doing my best. I promise I'll do better." "Your best isn't cutting it," Dave snapped back. "And honestly, I'm tired of the drama. Every week it's something new with you. You need more hours? You need an advance. You're getting calls from the hospital during shifts. This is a business, not a charity." There was a pause and Robert could hear Lily trying not to cry again. "My son is really sick," she said, her voice breaking. Robert stood in that hallway, every muscle in his body tense, fighting the urge to burst into that office and tell Dave exactly who he was and exactly how fired he was about to be. But something held him back. He needed to hear all of it. He needed to understand just how deep this problem ran before he acted, so he stayed there, hidden in the shadows, listening to his employee get torn apart by someone who was supposed to lead her. "I can't have servers falling apart during shifts," Dave continued, his voice sharp and dismissive. "It makes the whole team look bad. It makes me look bad. And frankly, if you can't handle the pressure of this job while dealing with your personal situation, maybe this isn't the right place for you." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Robert heard Lily take a shaky breath. "Please," she said, and the desperation in that one word nearly broke his heart. "Please don't fire me. I need this job. My son needs me to have this job. I'll do better, I swear. I won't cry anymore. I'll smile more. Whatever you need, just please don't take this away from me." There was a long pause. Robert imagined Dave sitting there behind his desk, probably enjoying the power he had over this struggling mother. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted to something almost worse than anger. It was the false kindness of someone who thought they were being generous. "Look, I'm not a monster," Dave said, though everything Robert had heard suggested otherwise. "I get that you're in a tough spot. But you have to understand my position too. I've got corporate breathing down my neck about numbers, about efficiency. I can't afford dead weight. So here's the deal. You pull yourself together, stop with the waterworks, and prove to me that you can do this job without bringing your personal drama to work. Can you do that?" "Yes," Lily said immediately. "Yes, I can do that." "Thank you. Thank you so much. Good, now get back out there. Your break's over." Robert heard movement and quickly slipped into the men's restroom, letting the door close behind him. He stood there in front of the sink, gripping the porcelain edge so hard his knuckles went white. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, and he barely recognized the anger in his own eyes. This was his company. His name was on the building. And this was what was happening under that name? He thought about all the mission statements he'd written, all the speeches he'd given about valuing employees and creating a supportive workplace culture. They were just empty words if this was the reality on the ground. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to calm down and think clearly. He couldn't blow his cover yet, not until he had a complete picture. Dave was obviously a problem, but was he the only problem? Robert needed to know if this was an isolated case of one bad manager, or if the rot had spread deeper through his organization. When he came out of the restroom, Lily was back in the dining room, putting on her brave face for the customers. Dave had returned to his office, probably feeling quite proud of himself for handling that situation. Robert wanted nothing more than to march in there right now, but he forced himself to walk back to his table instead. Patricia came by to check on him. "You doing okay, hon? You've been here a while. Can I get you anything else?" Robert looked up at her, this woman who'd been kind enough to tell him about Lily's situation earlier. "Actually, can I ask you something? Off the record?" Patricia glanced around and then slid into the booth across from him, clearly grateful for a chance to sit down for a moment. "What's on your mind?" "How long has that manager been here?" "Dave?" Her expression immediately soured. "About 6 months." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Things seem tense around here." Patricia let out a bitter laugh. "Tense is putting it mildly. Before Dave, we had a manager named Carol. She was wonderful, like a mom to all of us. She actually cared about whether we were doing okay. But she retired and corporate sent us Dave instead. She practically spat his name. Everything changed after that." "Changed how?" Robert asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew the answer. "He cut our hours first," Patricia explained, her voice low. "Said we were overstaffed and it was hurting profits. Never mind that customers started waiting longer for everything. Then he started writing people up for the smallest things. Being 2 minutes late, forgetting to smile enough, having an emergency and needing to leave early. He's got this whole atmosphere of fear going, you know. Everyone's afraid to ask for help or admit when they're struggling because they think he'll just fire them. And nobody's complained to corporate?" Robert asked carefully. Patricia shrugged. "Who's going to complain? Dave tells us all the time that he's got corporate's full support, that they love his results. And I guess he's not wrong. The labor costs probably look great on paper. Never mind that we're all miserable and customers are unhappy." She paused, looking at Robert curiously. "You're asking a lot of questions for a regular customer." Robert gave her a sad smile. "Sorry, I used to work in restaurants. Guess I still notice these things. And I hate seeing good people treated badly." "Well, you're right about that," Patricia said, standing up. "Good people are being treated badly here. But that's just how it is these days, I guess. Jobs are hard to find, so we all just put up with it." She walked away before Robert could respond, heading off to greet a new customer who'd just walked in. Robert sat there processing everything he'd learned. Dave had been here for 6 months, which lined up perfectly with when the customer satisfaction scores started dropping. He'd cut staff to make the numbers look good to corporate, creating an environment where good employees like Lily were literally working themselves sick while customers got worse service, and he'd done it all while claiming he had corporate backing. The worst part was, Dave probably did have someone's backing at corporate. Robert had gotten so disconnected from day-to-day operations that he'd hired layers of management between himself and the actual restaurants. Those middle managers looked at spreadsheets and saw that Dave was cutting labor costs and maintaining revenue. They probably sent him congratulatory emails while Lily cried in the kitchen, and Patricia's feet ached from doing the work of 2 people. This was on him. Robert had let this happen by not paying attention, by trusting that the systems he'd put in place would protect his employees. But systems were only as good as the people running them, and somewhere along the line, people like Dave had slipped through. The afternoon crept by. Robert ordered a piece of pie he didn't really want just to have an excuse to stay longer. He watched Lily work, saw how she pushed through her exhaustion to smile at every customer, how she was patient with a confused elderly woman trying to decide what to order, how she cleaned up a kid's spilled juice without a hint of frustration. She was an exceptional employee, exactly the kind of person who should be cherished and supported, not threatened and dismissed. Around 4 o'clock, the dinner prep started. A new cook arrived and the evening servers began trickling in for their shifts. Robert knew he should leave soon or risk looking suspicious, but he found himself ordering coffee again, unable to walk away just yet. Dave emerged from the office again, clipboard in hand, doing a walkthrough of the dining room. He stopped by each server, pointing out things that needed to be done before dinner rush. His tone was sharp, critical. Nothing was good enough. The salt shakers weren't lined up properly. A menu had a small stain. The windows could be cleaner. On and on he went, finding fault with everything while offering no help or encouragement. When he got to Lily, Robert leaned forward slightly to hear better. "You're staying for dinner shift?" Dave asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "Yes, sir," Lily said quietly. "I already cleared it with Patricia. Fine, but I don't want a repeat of this afternoon's drama." "Understood?" "Yes, sir." Dave walked away without another word, and Robert saw Lily's shoulders sag with relief at being dismissed. She looked absolutely drained, and her shift hadn't even technically started yet. That was when Robert made his decision. He couldn't just observe anymore. He needed to act, and he needed to do it now. But he had to be smart about it. If he revealed himself too soon, Dave would go into damage control mode. He'd have excuses ready, would probably try to throw Lily under the bus to save himself. No, Robert needed something more. He pulled out his phone and texted his assistant. "Need you to pull all personnel files for the downtown location. Manager evaluations, employee complaints, everything. Also get me the contact info for every staff member there. And do it quietly." The response came back quickly. "Everything okay?" "Not even close," Robert typed back. "But it will be." He looked around the diner one more time. At Patricia, who'd been doing the work of 2 people for months. At Lily, who was literally working herself to exhaustion to save her son. At the cooks in the back, stressed and overworked. At the customers who were getting subpar service through no fault of the actual staff. This ended today. Robert didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Dave's time as manager was measured in hours, not days. And more than that, Robert was going to make sure that every single person in this diner knew that their CEO had been here, had seen their struggles, and was going to make things right. But first, he needed one more piece of the puzzle. He needed to see Dave in action when he thought no one important was watching. The dinner rush started slowly and then hit all at once, the way it always does in restaurants. By 5:30, the diner was packed again. Families coming in after work, couples on dates, construction workers still in their dusty clothes looking for a hot meal. The 3 servers moved like they were dancing a complicated routine they'd practiced 1,000 times, weaving between tables, balancing plates, refilling drinks, always smiling even when customers were rude or impatient. Robert watched it all from his corner booth. He'd been there for hours now, nursing coffees and picking at food he barely tasted. A few of the servers had started giving him curious looks, probably wondering why this guy in the baseball cap was hanging around so long. But nobody asked him to leave, and he wasn't about to volunteer. Lily was struggling. Anyone with eyes could see it. She moved slower than the other servers, and a couple of times Robert saw her steady herself against a table like she was dizzy. At one point, she disappeared into the kitchen for a few minutes, and when she came back out, her face looked pale and drawn. She'd probably been trying to pull herself together, maybe splashing water on her face again or just taking a moment to breathe. The thing was, even running on fumes, she was still better with customers than most servers Robert had seen. She remembered that a regular liked his coffee a certain way. She brought extra napkins to a mom with messy toddlers before the mom even had to ask. She laughed genuinely at an old man's corny joke. This woman had every reason to phone it in, to just go through the motions and collect her paycheck. But she couldn't. It wasn't in her nature. She actually cared. That made what happened next even harder to watch. A table of 4 businessmen had been seated in Lily's section about 20 minutes earlier. Robert had clocked them immediately as trouble. Loud voices, snapping fingers to get attention. The kind of guys who treated restaurant staff like servants. They'd ordered drinks and appetizers, and Lily had gotten everything out to them quickly considering how slammed the kitchen was. But it wasn't fast enough for them. Robert heard one of them complaining loudly about the wait time, even though it had only been about 15 minutes. When Lily came by to check on them and let them know their entrees would be out soon, The main complainer decided to make his displeasure known. "This is ridiculous," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "We've been waiting forever. What kind of place is this?" "I'm so sorry, sir," Lily said, her professional smile firmly in place. "We're just really busy tonight. Your food should be up any minute. Can I get you anything else while you wait?" "Yeah, you can get us a server who actually knows what she's doing," the man shot back. His buddies laughed like he'd said something hilarious. Robert saw Lily's face flush, but she kept her composure. "I'll go check on your order right now," she said quietly, and turned to leave. "Must be nice," one of the other men said loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Getting to work a job where you can just take your time and not worry about actually performing." Lily stopped mid-step. For a second, Robert thought she might turn around and say something. He honestly wouldn't have blamed her if she did. But she just stood there, shoulders tight, before continuing on to the kitchen. Robert felt his anger rising again. He wanted to walk over to that table and tell those men exactly what he thought of them. But before he could move, Dave appeared, clipboard in hand as always, and made a beeline for the businessman's table. "Gentlemen, is everything all right?" Dave asked, his voice dripping with concern. "I couldn't help but overhear you had some concerns." The main complainer immediately launched into a tirade about slow service and incompetent staff. Dave nodded along sympathetically, occasionally shooting glances toward the kitchen where Lily had disappeared. When the man finally finished, Dave's response made Robert's blood boil. "I sincerely apologize for your experience," Dave said smoothly. "Your server is going through some personal issues, and frankly, it's affecting her performance. I've spoken to her about it, but clearly the message isn't getting through." He paused, then added, "Your entire meal is on the house tonight. It's the least I can do for such loyal customers." The businessmen seemed satisfied with this, their complaints turning to thanks. Dave walked away looking pleased with himself, like he'd just handled a crisis beautifully. Robert sat there stunned. Dave had just thrown Lily under the bus to appease some rude customers, offered them free food that would come out of the restaurant's profits, and probably felt like he'd done his job well. When Lily came back out with their food a few minutes later, she had no idea what Dave had just said about her. She served the meal with the same professionalism she'd shown all day, even apologized again for the wait. The businessmen were slightly nicer now that they knew they weren't paying, but they didn't thank her or acknowledge that maybe they'd been unreasonable. Robert pulled out his phone and typed a quick note into his messages, documenting what he'd just witnessed. The time, the situation, exactly what Dave had said. He'd been collecting evidence all day, but this felt like the final straw. Dave wasn't just unsupportive or cold. He was actively undermining his own staff to make himself look good. The evening continued. Robert ordered a slice of cake he didn't want. Then another coffee. The servers had definitely noticed his extended stay by now, but they were too busy to question it. Around 7 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. She'd sent him the files he'd requested, personnel records and complaint logs for the downtown location. Robert opened them right there in the booth, scrolling through on his phone. What he found made him sick to his stomach. In the 6 months since Dave had taken over, there had been 12 formal complaints filed against him by staff members. 12. They ranged from harassment to unfair scheduling to verbal abuse. Every single one had been reviewed by someone in middle management and dismissed as personality conflicts or employee sensitivity. One note actually said that Dave was results-oriented and some employees just couldn't handle his management style. Results-oriented. That was the phrase corporate had used to justify keeping a man who'd made a dozen employees miserable enough to file official complaints. Robert felt personally responsible for every single one of those complaints being ignored. He'd built the system that allowed this to happen. There was more. Dave had fired 3 people in the last 6 months, all for what he called performance issues. But when Robert looked at their records from before Dave arrived, they'd all been good employees. One had worked at the diner for 8 years. 8 years of positive reviews, and then suddenly she was fired for being consistently late, even though the timestamps showed she'd been late exactly twice, both times by less than 5 minutes. He kept scrolling and found Lily's file. She'd been working at the diner for almost 3 years. Her reviews were glowing. Customers loved her. The previous manager, Carol, had written, "Lily is one of the best servers I've ever worked with. She genuinely cares about making people's day better." Any restaurant would be lucky to have her. That was dated 8 months ago. Since then, Dave had written her up 4 times, once for taking a phone call during her shift, which turned out to be the hospital calling about her son. Once for appearing distracted, once for requesting a schedule change to make a doctor's appointment, and once for emotional outburst in workplace, which must have been one of the times she'd cried. Robert closed his phone and just sat there for a minute, processing it all. This wasn't just one bad day or one bad interaction. This was systematic. Dave had created a culture of fear and disrespect, and he'd done it with corporate's blessing because his numbers looked good on paper. Well, those numbers were about to stop mattering. Around 8 o'clock, Robert saw something that made his decision final. Lily was carrying a tray of drinks to a table when she suddenly wobbled, her leg seeming to give out slightly. She caught herself and managed not to drop anything, but Robert saw the flash of pain cross her face. She delivered the drinks with a smile and then, thinking no one was watching, leaned against the wall for a moment with her eyes closed, just trying to catch her breath. Patricia noticed and went over to her. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Patricia's concerned face and Lily shaking her head, insisting she was fine. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Lily was already pushing off the wall and heading to her next table. That was when Dave came out of the office again, saw the two of them, and walked over. "Problem?" he asked, his tone making it clear he didn't actually care about the answer. "Lily's not feeling well," Patricia said. "Maybe she should go home early." "We're short-staffed as it is," Dave replied. "She can tough it out. It's just a few more hours." "Dave, she's been here since 6 this morning," Patricia argued. "That's 14 hours, and whose choice was that?" Dave shot back. "She's the one who wanted the extra hours. If she can't handle it, that's not my problem." He walked away, leaving both women standing there. Patricia put a hand on Lily's shoulder, said something Robert couldn't hear, and then they both went back to work. That was it. Robert had seen enough. More than enough. He pulled out his phone and made a call. His assistant answered on the first ring. "I need you to set something up for me," Robert said quietly. Robert didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Lily's face, about Patricia's tired eyes, about all those complaints that had been dismissed and ignored. By the time the sun came up, he had already been awake for hours, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going over everything one more time. At 8 in the morning, he put on his best suit, the navy one his mother had always said made him look trustworthy. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back compared to the guy in the baseball cap from yesterday. Today, there would be no disguises. Today, everyone was going to know exactly who he was. His assistant had worked late into the night making the arrangements. Every staff member from the downtown location had been contacted and told to come in at 9 for a mandatory paid meeting. No one had been told what it was about, just that it was important and that their jobs weren't in danger. Robert knew they'd all be worried anyway. When corporate suddenly calls a meeting, people assume the worst. He arrived at the diner at 8:30. The morning crew was just starting their shift, getting the coffee brewing and prepping for breakfast. They looked surprised to see a man in an expensive suit walk in, but they didn't recognize him. Why would they? Most of them had probably never seen the CEO in person. 2 people from HR were already there, sitting in a booth with folders and laptops. They stood when they saw Robert, looking nervous. They should be nervous. They were part of the system that had let this happen. "Is everyone coming?" Robert asked. "Yes, sir," the senior HR manager, a woman named Helen, replied. "We've confirmed attendance from all 12 staff members currently employed at this location. Dave doesn't know what this is about yet. We told him it was a corporate visit for operational review." "Good. Where is he?" "In the office," Robert nodded. "Let's wait until everyone's here. I want the whole staff to hear what I have to say." Over the next 20 minutes, they started arriving. First came the morning cook, looking confused. Then Patricia, who'd probably been working there long enough to have seen corporate visits before and knew they rarely meant anything good. Then the other servers, the dishwasher, the prep cook. Each one walked in looking worried, whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. Lily was one of the last to arrive. She looked even more exhausted than yesterday, if that was possible. She had her hair pulled back again and she was wearing her uniform, probably assuming she'd be working after the meeting. When she saw all the corporate people and the serious faces, Robert watched the color drain from her face. She probably thought she was being fired. At exactly 9 o'clock, Dave emerged from the office. He'd put on a dress shirt instead of his usual polo, clearly wanting to look professional for the corporate visitors. He walked over to Robert with a confident smile, extending his hand. "You must be from corporate," Dave said. "Dave Thompson, General Manager. Great to meet you. I've been looking forward to showing you how efficiently we're running things here." Robert shook his hand, his grip firm. "Robert Wellington," he said simply. It took Dave a second, then another second. Then Robert watched as realization crashed over the man's face like a bucket of ice water. The color drained away. The confident smile disappeared. His hand went limp in Robert's grip. "Mr. Wellington," Dave stammered. I had no idea you were coming. I would have prepared. If I'd known..." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," Robert said coldly. He released Dave's hand and turned to address the room. "Everyone, please sit down. I know you're all worried, and I know some of you are confused about why you're here. I promise this will all make sense soon." The staff slowly found seats, filling up the booths and tables. Lily sat near the back, looking like she wanted to disappear. Patricia sat next to her, and Robert saw her reach over and squeeze Lily's hand. Robert stood at the front of the room, looking at each face. These were his employees. These were the people who made his business run, who served his customers, who carried his family name on their uniforms. And he'd failed them. "My name is Robert Wellington," he began. "I own this company. Every diner with our name on it belongs to me. And yesterday I spent the entire day here, from lunch through dinner rush. But I didn't come as the CEO. I came disguised as a regular customer because I wanted to see the truth of what was happening here." He could see the shock on their faces, the confusion. Dave had gone pale and was standing frozen near the back. "What I saw yesterday broke my heart," Robert continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I saw servers working themselves to exhaustion because they're understaffed. I saw a manager who treated his team with contempt instead of respect. I saw a young mother breaking down in tears because she's trying so hard to take care of her sick son while working double shifts, and instead of getting support, she got threatened." Lily's eyes went wide. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. "I heard a manager tell a struggling employee that this was a business, not a charity," Robert said, his voice getting harder. "I watched him throw that same employee under the bus to appease some rude customers. I saw him refuse to let someone go home early even, after they'd worked a 14-hour shift." He turned to look directly at Dave. "I also spent last night reading through 6 months of complaints that were filed against you. 12 formal complaints from good employees. Every single one dismissed by middle management because your labor costs looked good on paper. 3 people fired under suspicious circumstances. A culture of fear where people are afraid to ask for help or admit when they're struggling." Dave opened his mouth to speak, but Robert held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and HR will be in touch about your final paycheck. But more than that, I want you to understand something. These people you've been treating like they're disposable, they're the heart of this business. They're the reason customers come here. And you didn't just fail them as a manager. You failed the basic requirement of being a decent human being." 2 security officers that Robert had arranged to be there stepped forward. Dave's face went red, then white again. "You can't do this," he protested weakly. "I've increased profits. I've cut costs. The numbers don't matter if we've lost our soul," Robert cut him off. "And that's exactly what happened here. Now please leave before I have you escorted out." Dave looked around the room like he might find support somewhere, but every face was either cold or relieved. He grabbed his jacket from the office and left without another word, the security officers following behind him. The room was silent for a long moment after he left. Then Robert turned back to his staff. "I owe all of you an apology," he said quietly. "I built this company on the idea that we'd treat people right, that we'd be different from other places. But I got so caught up in growth and expansion that I stopped paying attention to what was actually happening in my restaurants. I trusted systems and middle management instead of trusting my gut and checking in with the people doing the actual work. That's on me, and I'm sorry." Patricia spoke up, her voice shaky. "What happens now?" "Now we fix things," Robert said. "Starting today, we're making changes. Real changes, not just promises. First, we're hiring more staff so you're not all running yourselves into the ground. Second, I'm implementing a new direct line to corporate for any employee who has concerns. No more complaints getting buried by middle management. He paused, then looked directly at Lily. And third, I'm expanding our employee assistance program. Anyone facing a family emergency or medical crisis will have access to financial support, counseling services, and flexible scheduling. Because Dave was wrong. This is a business, yes, but businesses are made up of people, and taking care of our people isn't charity. It's just basic human decency. Lily was crying now, but these were different tears than yesterday. Patricia had her arm around her shoulders. Lily, Robert said gently, I know about your son. I know about the medical bills. The company is going to cover those bills, all of them, retroactively and going forward. And I'm promoting you to shift supervisor with a significant raise. You've shown more leadership and grace under pressure than most managers I've seen. If you're interested in the position, that is. Lily couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Robert spent the next 2 hours talking with the staff, hearing their concerns, making notes, and making promises he fully intended to keep. He learned names and stories. He found out that Patricia had been picking up extra shifts to help pay for her granddaughter's college, that the morning cook had been working there for 15 years and loved the job, but hated coming to work under Dave's management, that the dishwasher was saving up to open his own restaurant someday. These were real people with real lives and real dreams. And Robert had almost forgotten that in his pursuit of building an empire. Before he left that day, Robert gathered everyone one more time. I'm going to be spending more time in the restaurants from now on, he told them. Not checking up on you, but working alongside you, understanding what you need to do your jobs well. And I'm going to make sure every other location is meeting the same standards we're setting here. He looked around the room one more time.